Take a few moments to renew, refresh our motivation for being here that we generated earlier. In case you weren't here earlier, I suggested that those who are familiar with bodhicitta, the aspiration to become a fully enlightened Buddha for the benefit of all living beings. So if you're familiar with that, you can generate that motivation. But if you're new and not so familiar with the bodhicitta motivation, try to generate the altruistic motivation of wanting to benefit others. You can think, yeah, I really want to help others in my life and make a positive contribution to society, to the world. So I would like to learn something here that will help me to do that. Or in a very simple way, you could just think, may this session of teaching and meditation be as beneficial as possible to others, to the world. Okay. So I think there were still some questions left from this morning, but I would prefer to talk for a while, and I'll leave time at the end. Try to leave more time than I did this morning for question and answer. But during the lunch break, I was thinking about, because Cindy asked the question about pain, that people sometimes have a lot of pain as they are dying, and then pain medication is given, but then that can cause the person's mind to be kind of unconscious, semi-conscious, and then it's difficult to, if you are a Dharma practitioner, difficult to generate positive states of mind. But on the other hand, if you're overwhelmed by pain, if the pain is really great, that would also make it difficult to manage the mind and be able to have a positive state of mind. But anyway, I remembered this story I heard, and I just heard it secondhand, so I can't confirm it's true or not. But Ken Rinpoche Lama Lundrup, who visited ABC numerous times, he was the abbot of Kopan Monastery. I don't know what year he passed away, but the new one is here now. His reincarnation, Riksel Rinpoche. He's 12 years old, so it must have been at least 14 years ago. Anyway, Ken Rinpoche had cancer. Does anyone remember what kind of cancer it was? Some kind of cancer. And I think it sounds like he had pain. There was pain. He was staying at Kopan Monastery, and I heard there was a Western nurse that was staying there and taking care of him. And so the story is that once Lama Zopa Rinpoche visited Kopan Monastery, and I guess he went to Ken Rinpoche's room to visit him, and Ken Rinpoche asked Lama Zopa Rinpoche, please pray for me to have more pain. Anyone hear that story? When I heard that story, I was like, kind of mind-blowing, right? Usually it's the opposite. please, Rinpoche, take my pain away, help me to have less pain. But to ask for more pain? Wow. But, I mean, it's possible. It's feasible because, in Tibetan Buddhism, there's this practice of tonglen, taking and giving, which is for the cultivation of bodhicitta, part of the bodhisattva's practice. And in the practice of tonglen, you do pray to take on pain and suffering and problems of other beings and give them your happiness and your virtue, your good things. And this practice is particularly targeted at the self-centered attitude, self-cherishing, this attitude that says, me first, I'm more important than everybody else, my happiness is more important, and so on. So that's our usual attitude. We think of ourselves as more important than others, and we're always trying to get the good stuff for ourselves and push away the bad stuff, but we don't care that much about others. We care more about ourselves. So that selfish attitude we have is a big hindrance to enlightenment, becoming enlightened, becoming a Buddha. There's no such thing as a selfish Buddha. So you have to overcome self-centeredness to become enlightened. So that's part of the Bodhisattva's practice, is to decrease the self-centered attitude and increase altruism, where you care about others and you care about others more than yourself. So this practice of tonglen is to overcome the self-centered attitude. It's doing exactly opposite to what the self-centered attitude wants, right? Give me more pain, give my happiness to others. So it's quite feasible that he really did pray for that and really did wish that. And I remembered another story too. Another Lama, Kirti Tsenshab Rinpoche. Some of you may remember. He came here during the 90s in 494D over there. We had him here for, I don't know, a couple of weeks, maybe a month. Really wonderful Lama. And he, once on a visit to Israel, teaching visit, he wasn't feeling well. They took him to the hospital, and the doctors found that he had liver cancer. And when they went to his room to inform him of this bad news, I can imagine for doctors that must be one of the most difficult aspects of their job, is to have to tell a patient that they have cancer, because you want to give good news to your patients. You don't want to give them bad news, make them unhappy, and so on. So they went to tell Kirti Tsenshab Rinpoche that he had liver cancer, and Kirti Tsenshab Rinpoche smiled and said, "Thank you." He wasn't unhappy, upset. I imagine the doctors were pretty surprised. But then when the students heard the news, they were quite unhappy. And then Rinpoche sent a message to them saying, don't be sad, because for a long time I have been praying to take on the suffering of sentient beings. And now I have the opportunity to do that. So it's like, this is an answer to my prayers. So for real practitioners of the Mahayana path, the Bodhisattva path, I'm not at that point yet, but they develop this fearless, courageous attitude about suffering, pain, problems. So instead of being afraid and running away and trying to get rid of problems, they actually welcome problems, because they know that going through problems and difficulties helps you to grow, helps you to progress along the path. Yeah? If you know how to transform them, that's the idea. You learn different ways, different techniques of transforming problems and suffering, so that instead of being overwhelmed by them, becoming depressed, unhappy, angry, you use them. You apply your understanding and knowledge of the Dharma and use those practices, use those difficulties in your practice, like the practice of Tonglen. And so it helps to increase your compassion, your love, your bodhicitta, and patience, all kinds of good qualities, and wisdom too. So all sorts of good qualities that will help you grow, progress along the path. So, yeah, that's just another sort of addition to, yeah, I aspire to be at that point, but not there yet. And then I was also talking about fear and ways of working with fear, because when we do look at this topic of death, as well as the other sorts of difficulties that we'll probably encounter as we get older, it's natural for fear to come up. And so this is just a natural state of mind. We shouldn't feel ashamed, right? Don't be ashamed of fear, and don't deny it. It doesn't help to deny it, like pretend that it's not there when it is. That's not going to help, because it will still be there. So when fear comes up, then there are things we can do to work with it. So I mentioned one thing this morning, a breathing method that can really help us to relax. So that's something you could try. But also, relaxing the body is helpful for fear. So, like there's one practice called a body scan, where you just mentally go through your body. You can go from the top of your head down to your toes, or other way around, from the bottom to the top. So you're just going to go through your body and relax each part of the body bit by bit. And you can spend as much time or as little time as you need. So relaxing the body also helps to reduce fear and anxiety. And the practice of mindfulness, just being mindful of your mind, what's going on in your mind, not getting caught up in it, but kind of stepping back and observing what is going on in your mind, remembering impermanence, how every experience we have, every thought, every feeling is impermanent. It's not solid and permanent and always there, but it's flowing and changing like a river, like a stream. So if you can kind of detach yourself from the thoughts and the feelings involved with fear and just observe them, you can see how they are impermanent and they change. And then I'll share, there's a book called Buddha's Brain. I don't know if you've, it's a nice book. It's written by an American neuropsychologist. His name is Rick Hansen. So he's very knowledgeable about the brain, and also about Buddhism, because he's a student and practitioner and teacher of Buddhism. So in that book, in chapter 5, there's a section that's called Feeling Safer, and he talks about these different ways to deal with fear and anxiety. So another method is using imagery. He said, if you bring to mind figures that you feel comfortable with, and you feel like, they give you protection. It could be your grandmother, or some family member that that you feel good about. Just bringing that person to mind can help you feel safer. And this is similar in Buddhism. We have refuge, the practice of refuge, where we develop confidence in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And there's many different Buddha figures for example, Tara, female Buddha, is here on the wall, and Tara is said to protect from fears, all different kinds of fears. There's a lot of stories about Tara helping people when they're in dangerous situations, and they take refuge in her and pray to her, and they get out of that situation, almost like she comes to their rescue. So, so if you do feel connected with any particular Buddha figure, then bring them to mind, pray to them, feel that they are present with you, and that can help you to feel more relaxed and protected, like you're not all alone having to deal with this difficult situation. And then another method is to investigate the fear, like the question that came up this morning. So if fear comes up, it's helpful to investigate it. Like, ask yourself, what exactly am I afraid of? Because the mind is kind of maybe creating stories, fantasies about some terrible thing that's going to happen to me, and then you believe that that thing really is going to happen, and then you just feel terrified of it. And so this can be going on in our mind without our awareness. It's like at a deeper level of the mind, our mind is sort of creating these stories, these fantasies. And so it's good to look at that and ask ourselves, well, what am I scared of? What do I think is going to happen that's so terrible, that's so frightening? So get a clear picture of that. And then once you understand that, ask yourself, well, how definite is it that this will happen? Like, is it absolutely definite that this thing is going to happen? Or is it just, yeah, it might happen, but it might not, right? So often that is the case. For example, there are people who are afraid of flying in airplanes because they think it's going to crash. They're going to die, right? So I once read statistics on airplane crashes, and they compared the number of planes that take off and land safely, the number of planes that crash. And it's very, very rare that a plane crashes, yeah? It's just not likely that the plane you're on is going to crash. So that's the reality. And yet people's minds, they make up this story. If I get on that plane, it's definitely going to crash. Unless they don't want to get on that plane. So that just shows how our mind can sometimes create these stories and then make us terrified, but there's not, it's possible, yeah, there is always the possibility that the plane will crash, but statistically, it's not very likely. And in fact, it said that there are more car crashes than plane crashes. You're much more likely to get injured or killed in a car crash than a plane crash. But how many people are scared to get in a car? Right? Given the number of cars driving around Singapore, it doesn't look like many people are afraid of cars. So, the reality is it makes more sense to be scared of cars than airplanes. And once I was giving this talk to a group of people, and one man who's actually a doctor, he said, statistically, most people die in bed. So we should be afraid of getting in bed. That's the place where people usually die. But, people usually aren't afraid to get into bed. They're happy to get to bed. So, yeah, that just shows how people can sometimes have these unrealistic ways of thinking that are really out of sync with reality. And so that's something we can discover if we look at our fears and ask ourselves, is this realistic? Is it realistic for me to have this fear or not? So that might give us some relief. But then even if we say, yeah, but it might happen, that plane might crash, But then you can also think, okay, but if that does happen, would it necessarily be that bad? I mean, of course, it could be the end of our life. We might die. But we're going to die anyway, at some point in some time, right? We can't avoid that. You can't live your life in such a way that you say, I'm not going to die. I'm not going to let myself die anytime, any way, any place. It's impossible. Even if you stay at home and you lock all your doors, I mean, death can happen at home. A lot of people die at home. They get electrocuted or have a heart attack and fall down. I mean, there's just no way we can avoid dying. So whether it's in a plane or it's in our bathtub or, or in our bed, it's going to happen sometime sooner or later. And so, I mean, this is what I think, because I often travel on planes. I think, yes, it might happen. This plane might crash. But I have practices I can do to keep my mind in a positive state. So even if the plane does crash, I'll do my practices and be in a good state. So that's something else you can think. So even if this dreaded thing, this horrible thing might happen to you, are there things you can do to manage it, right? Can you manage it? Can you deal with it? So often we can find. Another thing is another question we could ask ourselves is if we're afraid of a certain type of experience that we might go through, to check if there are people we could turn to for help. For example, surgery, okay? If your doctor says you need to go for surgery, and that can be pretty scary, yeah? But lots of people get surgery, and they survive, and they're okay. And so it can be really helpful to talk to people who have been through surgery, especially the same kind of surgery that you have to go through. Talk to them, find out, what is it like, and that can be very reassuring. They'll say, yeah, it was difficult, but I'm still here. I survived, and they may even say, I'm glad I went through that surgery because it really helped me to feel better, and so on. So yeah, that's just one example, but talking to others, asking their help and advice and support, that can help as well to reduce our fears. So in the book, Buddha's Brain, the author, Rick Hansen, says, most fears are exaggerated. As you go through life, your brain acquires expectations based on your experiences, particularly negative ones. When situations occur that are even remotely similar, your brain automatically applies its expectations to them. If it expects pain or loss, or even just the threat of these, it pulses fear signals. Okay, so he's talking about it from the point of view of our brain, how our brain reacts. So even if we just get one tiny little glimmer of something similar to a bad experience we had in the past, then the brain just, automatically goes into, fight or flight mode, something like that. Flight mode, yeah, we get scared. And he says, but because of the negativity bias, many expectations of pain or loss are overstated or completely unfounded. So negativity bias means, he said that in neuroscience, what they find is that the way our brain works, it pays more attention to negative information and less attention to positive information. And in fact, he says our brain is like Velcro when it comes to bad experiences, and it's like Teflon when it comes to good experiences. In other words, when bad things happen to us, they stick. They stick in our brain. When good things happen to us, they just slide right off. So you might notice this. I notice this in myself, yeah? It's like if you go through your day, yeah? And then at the end of the day, you sort of think about your day, or you have feelings about your day. Maybe you had a lot of good experiences during your day, a lot of good things. People were nice to you, you had a nice lunch, you went for a nice walk. So you had a lot of good things during your day. Maybe there was one bad thing. Yeah, one kind of uncomfortable encounter with somebody, and the person wasn't very nice, and it wasn't very pleasant. One bad thing. So what do you remember at the end of your day? That one bad thing. That's like, oh, almost like my whole day was ruined because of that one bad thing. Does that sound familiar? Do you notice that? Maybe that's a little exaggerated, but just pay attention to that, yeah? That our mind does tend to focus more on negative things than positive things. Actually, I remember noticing that when I was teaching at ABC in the past, 494D. I was teaching a Lamrim class, and so it was kind of long, ongoing for months. And sometimes I would, come and start teaching, and I would notice people who were missing. Yeah? I would know, this person isn't here, this person isn't here, this person isn't here. And I'd feel, why aren't they here? They should be here. And then I realized that, yeah, I'm paying more attention to the people who are not there than the people who are there. So instead of appreciating the people who did show up, I was feeling unhappy about the people who didn't show up. So anyway, it's helpful to notice that, or to be aware that that's the way our mind works. It does tend to pay more attention to and focus more on negative things and less on positive things. So in the book, Rick Hansen says, a way to counteract that is to deliberately focus on positive things, good things. So as you go through your day, when you have some pleasant experience, even if it's just, looking at a beautiful flower, or a smiling face, or, something pleasant, yeah, don't just let it slide off, but stay with that experience for at least 5 seconds. That's not very long, but just let yourself absorb and soak in that experience. And in that way, he says, if we do that, then our brain will start to change more, and we'll start to have more positive experiences and less negative ones. And then when we do have negative ones, like fear, there are things we can do to manage our fear instead of just getting stuck. Yeah, getting stuck and keep thinking again and again and again about what we're afraid of. Okay, so those are some things that you can try if you do feel fear coming up with regard to this topic of death and dying. So, yeah, this was actually the title slide, and this kind of image of the Buddha that's in that position of lying down. There are statues, you've maybe seen them in Thailand, Burma, I think also Japan. But it's common in Buddhist countries to have statues like that. And I've seen on the internet, sometimes they call this sleeping Buddha. Sleeping Buddha. It's not really sleeping, but this is the position the Buddha put himself in at the end of his life, just before he passed away, and attained what's called parinirvana. And so I think the reason that Buddhist countries have images like this is to just remember that when the Buddha passed away, he was completely peaceful. He wasn't afraid, he wasn't in pain, he wasn't suffering, he didn't have any suffering at all, because he had completely transformed his mind. he freed his mind from all the afflictions and karma, all the causes of suffering. So his mind was completely calm and clear and peaceful. And this experience in the Buddha's life is normally called the parinirvana. It's like the final nirvana of the Buddha. So he's completely peaceful. And it's recommended in our tradition that we adopt this posture when we sleep. When we go to sleep at night, we also lie down in that same way, lying on our right side with our head resting in our hand. And if we can also adopt that posture at the end of our life. I mean, there's some stories, some lamas are in meditation posture when they die, sitting in meditation, but others will lie down like that. So it's auspicious to lie down in the same way as the Buddha. Okay, so let's look at the second of the 3 roots of the 9-point meditation on death. So the second root is the time of death is uncertain. So even if we get comfortable with the first one, that death is definite, if we get over our fear and our resistance and accept, yes, definitely I'm going to die, I can't avoid it. We may still have this attitude in our mind that thinks it's far away. It's not going to happen anytime soon. So we kind of feel like death is way off in the future, a long time from now. And so I don't really need to think about it now, right? You ever notice that idea in your mind that, yeah, I know I'm going to die, but it's not going to happen anytime soon. I'm still young. That's one reason for thinking that way. I'm young, or maybe not so young, maybe 30, 40, 50. But, we tend to think death is something that happens to elderly people in their 80s, 90s, over 100, and we think, oh, I'm not there yet, so I don't need to think about death now. So we can use that as an excuse to then not take this topic very seriously. So the first of the 3 reasons is that human lifespan is uncertain. So that addresses that particular idea that I'm not going to die soon because I'm not old. I don't need to think about death now because I'm not old. Well, is it only old people who die? Right? Obviously not. I'm sure all of us know people who died when they were young, right? Even babies, before they reach the age of 1, haven't even started walking and talking, they can die. Little children can die. Teenagers can die. People in their 20s can die, right? So it's like death can happen at any age, not just at an advanced stage. Some of you may remember Venerable Tenzin Kunchok? No, what's her name? Venerable Kunchok? Tenzin Kunchok. Yeah, an Australian nun who was here for maybe a year or 2 in the 90s, 494D. So she came to help out for a while. She was quite young. I think when she was here, she was only in her 20s, late 20s. And then after leaving here, she was in other places, and I met her once in India, and she told me she had really bad pain in her back, and they were trying to figure out what the problem was. And then I heard that she went back to Australia, and they found she had lung cancer. And I think within just 6 months she passed away. which I was surprised. I thought, that's so fast. I had the idea that if you have a young body, then you can fight cancer. Your body will fight cancer. But then someone explained to me, actually it's the opposite. If you have a young body, the cancer cells will spread more than if you have an elderly body, an older body. So, yeah, there's one example of a young person, full of energy, very energetic, but very sad, very tragic that she passed away so young. So I'm sure we all know of others who passed away when they weren't so old. So yeah, the human lifespan is uncertain. What that means is, as human beings, there's no certainty that it's not that we are guaranteed a certain number of years of life. Yeah? Like, it isn't the case. They talk about life expectancy, right? They have those figures of life expectancy, but that's just an average. Like, if you're a woman living in this part of the world, then your life expectancy is, I don't know what. And if you're a male, it's such and such. Usually it's more for women. Women have longer life expectancies than men. But yeah, it depends on your gender, it depends on where you live, and various other factors. But that's just a possibility. Like, you can expect to live that long, but there's no guarantee that you will, because there's lots of other things that can happen that cause death, which is number 2, the second point. But anyway, the first point is there's nothing definite about our lifespan. We don't have a guaranteed number of years to live. In a way, that would be very helpful, because then you could, like, if you knew for sure you get 88 years or something, then you could plan your life, yeah? Which I heard, this is in India, they had that tradition of, planning their life. Okay, first part of your life, you go to school, then you get married and have a family, and then at the end of your life, then you devote yourself to spiritual practice, yeah? So, but there's no guarantee that we will live long enough to have that time to engage in spiritual practice. So that's one reason why the time of death is uncertain. Our age has nothing to do with it, right? No guarantee that if you're young or young-ish, then you have a long time to live. And then another idea we may have is that it has to do with health. We may think, I'm healthy. I don't have cancer. I don't have any other serious illness. So I don't need to think about death soon. And we think, oh, somebody who has cancer, or somebody who has high blood pressure, who's already had one heart attack, they may die soon, but not me. So that the second reason answers that doubt, or that way of thinking, that there are many causes of death. I mean, sickness, I guess, is the number one cause. Most people die, I think, what is it? What's the number one? Is it heart disease? I think usually, the number one cause of death is heart disease. And then cancer, maybe number 2. So illness, physical problems are the main causes for people to die, but not the only causes. There's lots of other causes, other things that can happen, like accidents, car accidents, plane accidents, accidents at work, even at home. Accidents can happen at home that can cause death. People can fall or get electrocuted, or there can be a fire. So there's many, many different causes of death, many different ways that death can happen. And it could be interesting to kind of look into that. And I know Lama Zopa Rinpoche, I don't know if he was like that the whole time, but in the past he would often collect these stories, kind of amazing stories of ways that people died, and then he would tell these stories in his teachings. And there was one story, it's kind of hard to believe, but anyway, it's also possible. He said there was a forest fire somewhere, and when there's a forest fire, they have planes and helicopters that go, and they have like a big bucket that picks up water from a lake or the ocean, and then they dump the water on the fire. And so that was happening. Then when the forest fire was over, the fire had gone out, and they were kind of cleaning up all the mess. They found the body of somebody wearing diving gear. Yeah? So it looks like, yeah, that person was in the water, doing scuba diving, and then got picked up and dumped on the fire. I mean, it's possible, but it's really weird. But anyway, that just kind of shows you just never know what is going to happen. Yeah, you do something for enjoyment, like scuba diving, and you end up being dumped on a forest fire. Another story, and I think this one is true. There was a tourist visiting Notre Dame Cathedral in France, in Paris, big, beautiful cathedral, and was standing outside looking up at the cathedral, admiring it, maybe taking photos. And at the same time, there was a person who wanted to commit suicide and went up to the top of the cathedral and jumped and landed on this person who was standing there in front admiring the cathedral. And that person, the person who was the tourist, was killed. They died. And the person who jumped survived. That's the person who wanted to die, and they didn't die, and the other person did die. Again, it's like, a little hard to believe, but yeah, definitely possible. And then another story. This is one that I saw myself in the newspaper, so I think it is true. I think it was in South Africa. There was a Rotary Club or Lions Club meeting, and I guess they take turns to give talks to each other. So this one man was giving a talk, and the theme of his talk was something like, this, what we're talking about right here. We don't know how much time we have to live, so we need to make good use of our life, right? So I guess he gave a really good talk, very inspiring, and finished his talk, everybody's applauding, and he sat down, and then he fell over and was on the floor and couldn't breathe. So it seems he had some sort of sweet, like a cough sweet or whatever in his mouth, and it went down his throat and lodged in his lung pipe. What do you call it? Anyway, and he choked to death before they could get help for him. So he died of. So yeah, like a cough, cough drop, cough lotion, little innocent thing that's supposed to help us, right? But that became the cause for him to die. So yeah, these are just illustrations of how things can happen. Like we would never imagine, never expect to have such an experience happening, right? And yet it can, and it does. And so, yeah, as we go about our day, we're probably not really thinking, oh, maybe today I will die, maybe something will happen to me today. But then something can happen. And it doesn't need to be huge and momentous, like an earthquake or, plane falling down from the sky. Just something innocent, like while we're eating, or crossing the street. Things can happen. So this is another way to help us get a sense that we really don't know when our time will come. And another thing is sleeping. Yeah, there are cases of people, I know a few myself, who died in their sleep, and they couldn't find anything wrong with them. One was Gelongla. I don't know if you remember him. He was a German monk who lived in Malaysia, disciple of Gelek Rinpoche. Maybe he didn't come to Singapore very much, but he was a very, very devoted disciple, and did a lot of Dharma work in Malaysia. And so I heard once Gelek Rinpoche was holding a retreat, and a lot of people had gathered in this place to attend the retreat. Gelongla was there, and one morning he didn't get out of bed, and he had a roommate, and the roommate went to, wake him up, and found that he wasn't alive. He died in his sleep. He was only about 40, well, not very old. And they couldn't find anything wrong. Maybe he had a cold or something really minor, but they really couldn't find the cause of death. So I've heard of a number of cases like that, of people dying in their sleep, even though they're not ill and nothing terrible happens to them. They just go to sleep and don't wake up again. So, yeah, it really is strange how these things can happen. Okay, then number 3, the third reason is that our human body and life are very fragile. So, when we're healthy, we may have this feeling like, I'm strong, I can do many things, I have a lot of energy, and it's almost as if we are invincible, right? Like we could just keep going forever. But it doesn't take very much to bring our life to an end. If you think about, like, coronavirus, right? Tiny, microscopic little cells, virus. So when that got into people's bodies, especially in the beginning, when they didn't have any way to cure it, they didn't know how to cure it, very quickly, sometimes within a couple of hours or a couple of days, people died. And it's just so tiny, right? So small. So it doesn't take something huge, like a tiger or a bomb, to end our life. It can be something quite small. So yeah, life is actually quite fragile. It can end quickly and without something momentous, huge. So it's good to get a sense of that yeah, our life is quite fragile. Another example is bullets. Bullets are often very, very small, but if they go into certain parts of the body, like especially the heart or the brain, then just very quickly life ends. Unfortunately, people in America love their guns, and that's a cause of a lot of deaths. Yeah. And another thing they say in the teachings, the traditional teachings, they say that, one sort of irony or tragedy is that even things that we normally rely on to stay alive and be healthy, they can sometimes be the cause of death, such as food. Right? Food is necessary to survive. We enjoy it. we can't live without it. But sometimes food becomes the cause of death. Like if the food is poisoned, contaminated, or if you eat too much on a regular basis, then yeah, you can have a heart attack or something. So yeah, eating can be a cause of death. And another example is medicine. Medicine, again, is normally to cure illness and help us stay alive longer. But medicine sometimes becomes the cause of death. If you have a bad reaction to the medicine or you have an overdose, I guess, like you mentioned fentanyl this morning. I don't know the whole story behind that, but that's, a very powerful painkiller, so it can help people to relieve pain. But so many people are dying of fentanyl. It's on the streets, and many, many, many people are getting addicted. I don't know about here in this country, but in America it's a huge problem. And dying of fentanyl overdose. And then sometimes people go into a hospital to be treated for one type of illness, and that may be successful, but when they're there, they can sometimes get another illness. They pick up another illness that can be the cause of their death. So medicine, hospitals, medical treatment, and all these things are meant to help us, but they can sometimes be the cause of death. So those are like illustrations of how life is so fragile, yeah, and so uncertain. So after contemplating these, the ideal conclusion to reach is I must start practicing now, not, well, I guess we already did think about that earlier, not postpone for some time in the future, because we just don't know if we do have a long time to live. And so if we really value the Dharma, want to practice the Dharma, then it's important to start now. So let's do some meditation on these points. And if you would like to stretch, stand up, stretch, so you can be more comfortable during the meditation. So get into a good position for meditation, trying to keep your back straight. And this time of day it can be challenging to stay awake in meditation because it's warm and maybe our stomach is still full from lunch. So those are conditions that can make us sleepy. And so if you do feel sleepy, it's helpful to open your eyes a little, keep your eyes partially open, looking down on whatever's in front of you, the floor, your lap. So you have just enough light coming in to help you stay awake, but your focus isn't good enough that you're seeing a lot of things that might distract you. So let yourself relax in this position. and check your mind to see if it's on what we're doing, if you're attentive to this meditation that we're doing, or if you're thinking of other things in the past, the future, and so on. So put aside any other thoughts and really have the determination to keep your mind focused on what we are doing here on this meditation. So recall the meditation we did earlier before lunch on how death is definite. It's something that happens to everyone. As long as we're born, we live, then inevitably we will come to the end of our life and die. So it's impossible to avoid that. But then when it comes to thinking about our death, we may have a feeling that it won't happen soon, that it's far off in the distant future. And therefore we don't need to think about it so much now. But is this true? Can we be sure that death is far away in the future? So the first point is that human lifespan is uncertain. What this means is we don't have a guaranteed number of years of life, and everybody reaches that age and then they die. So instead, people die at all different ages, all different stages of their life. So bring to mind illustrations of that, people that you know or people you've heard of, like in the news, who have died at different ages, including young children, even babies, infants, young children, teenagers, and so on, just to get a sense that, yeah, everyone dies at a different time of their life, at a different age, not just people in their 80s or 90s. So what this means is that we have no way of knowing how much time we have left, at what age we will be when death happens to us. Then the second reason is that there are many causes of death. So there's different kinds of diseases, illnesses that we can get that can cause death. But there's also other things that can happen, like accidents, when traveling in a car or boat or plane or even a bicycle, or even walking on a road. And things can happen related to food, eating food, or going to the hospital, taking medicine, and so on. So there's different ways that death can happen to people. And some of these happen just very suddenly, unexpectedly, out of the blue. We would never imagine such a thing could happen. So you could think about some people you know or stories you've heard that illustrate the different ways that death can happen to people. And so again, we have no way of knowing which of the many causes of death will happen to us and will be the way that we ourselves die. And then the third reason is that our body and life are fragile. So you can check how you feel right now. You may feel strong and like you have a lot of energy. You feel like you could go on living for a long time and almost like nothing can stop that. But life is actually quite fragile. Even something very tiny like a virus or cancer cells can destroy our life and lead to death. So it doesn't take something huge and really violent like a earthquake or a tsunami wave or something coming from the outside. Even something tiny within our body can be the cause of our death. So contemplating these points might make us feel uneasy, even frightened, and that's not the purpose. We're not trying to scare ourselves, but just to kind of wake up and realize how fragile our life is, how uncertain our life is, and start to prepare ourselves for death, start doing things that will help us to keep our mind positive in a good state when death does happen to us, so that we're not caught by surprise and be totally unprepared. So see if you can reach the conclusion after contemplating these points that if you do see the value of Dharma practice, preparing yourself for death by practicing Dharma, then understand that it's important to start now and not have this idea that you have a long time to live, so you can postpone your Dharma practice till some time in the future. So maybe I could take a few questions now, if there's any urgent questions related to what we just talked about or what we've talked about so far.
Venerable Sangye Khadro, Buddhas and Bodhisattvas attain nirvana. They go to the Buddha Pure Land and don't come down to rebirth anymore, samsara. So how do they benefit the sentient beings?
You say Buddhas and Bodhisattvas go to a Pure Land and don't come into samsara anymore? That's not true.
They attain nirvana, right?
No. So Bodhisattvas, those are the ones who want to become enlightened, to help all sentient beings. And so they have to do a lot of practices, cultivate love, compassion, the 6 perfections, including wisdom, realizing the true nature of things. And when a bodhisattva reaches the point of having a direct realization of emptiness, the true nature of all things, so they have this wisdom that directly, that is able to directly perceive emptiness, the true nature of all things. So when they reach that point in their practice, then they have the ability to choose their rebirth. They're not yet enlightened, so they still have to be reborn, but they can choose their rebirth. They can control their rebirth. So they will choose to take birth in wherever they can be of benefit to sentient beings. And so their taking of rebirth in samsara isn't due to karma, like being uncontrollably thrown into a rebirth by their karma, but it's due to their compassion and their prayers, their determination to benefit sentient beings. So they can choose and control their rebirth, and so they'll take rebirth in different realms of samsara and benefit sentient beings. So they can continue doing that up until they reach Buddhahood, enlightenment. So they do take birth in samsara, and then once they become Buddhas, when someone is a Buddha, fully enlightened Buddha, then there's no more rebirth. You don't have to take rebirth anymore. But a Buddha has the ability to manifest different forms, and like many different forms, and go to many places at the same time. And so Buddha can be, maybe there's Buddha in this room, Buddha can go to Ukraine, Gaza, anywhere in the world, hell. So Buddhas will manifest forms to go to the different worlds, different realms, to help the sentient beings. That's not rebirth, that's not taking rebirth, but it's a different way of coming into the world and benefiting sentient beings. So Buddhas and Bodhisattvas have this determination to continue working to help sentient beings until everyone is free of samsara. They will never abandon sentient beings. So it isn't the case that they just go to some pure land and then, stay there and relax and enjoy themselves and don't care for sentient beings. So that's not correct. Yes?
I asked a little bit outside the subject, but related to the longer life, health. Yeah? I found here there are more female than male. Is that something to do related with the activity to the good health? Because I found that in many places when I attending, more female attending the spiritual thing. Is it have contribute to the good health or longer life?
I don't know. Yeah, this is actually a phenomenon that is found pretty much around the world. I mean, in many places, it's like that. But what my impression is that it used to be more. In the past, I think there were more women, very few men coming to Dharma teachings, Dharma courses, also getting ordained, at least in some countries, like in Taiwan, I heard there's many, many, many more nuns than monks. Not many men wanting to be monks, but a lot of women wanting to be nuns. So it's a phenomenon that you find in many, many places. And like in this room, I think, I haven't counted, but there does seem to be more women than men. I don't know reasons for that. But yeah, yeah, it could be different reasons. But yeah, a lot of women are very drawn to spiritual. But I've heard it's similar in Catholicism, for example, in Catholic faith. Also more women coming to church and becoming interested in helping, and practicing. So I don't know why it's like that, but yeah.
That is something to do with the spiritual activity, because I'm not particular on which religion, because I noticed that I have been in the different country like Scandinavia and so on, and more we call it female in the places activity like what we have, regardless what religion. Yeah, number one. Number two, I feel people are more connected with the spiritual. The female generally is there.
More.
Do you think it's because of the mind, the way of understanding or the way of working, the way of following the spiritual? Okay, I think not too detailed.
Yeah, I really don't know. I mean, there could be various reasons, and for different people, it could be different reasons. So I really don't know. I can't say in a general way. Yeah. She had a question from this morning.
Yeah, thank you so much, Venerable. I'd just like to ask if we have an elderly relative who we like to kind of help open up their view or transform their mindset about death, because say the relative doesn't believe in the consciousness going on after death and doesn't believe in a pure land. So how can we help such a close relative who is elderly?
So you have an elderly close relative, and did you say they are interested or they are not interested in?
Or they are not. They don't want to talk about death, and they don't believe in a consciousness going on after death and no pure land. So just stops like that.
Yeah, that's the case with a lot of people, and I don't think there's much that can be done about that. I have one friend in England, and he was very, very strong Buddhist since he was young, and his father, I think, was more scientific, materialist, just believed that all we have is this body, and when we die, everything ends, there's nothing that continues. And so the son, is really, I think he probably had conversations with his father and, tried to open his mind more, but the father was like, no. and then when the father died, the son was kind of hoping maybe as he gets closer to death, he might become more open and, accepting of something continuing, but he was disappointed. So that's the case with some people. They just hold on to that view right up to the end. And then I can't help but think they must be in for a big surprise.
Sorry, one more short question. So during the meditation, if we have attachment to our family and things like that, so how do we transform that attachment?
If we have attachment to our family,
Yeah, like say leaving our family, so our family leaving us and having that attachment to family members.
Yeah, well, that's actually part of the next of the practice, this 9-point death meditation. So maybe I'll go on and talk about that, and that question will get answered. Then if we have time, we can do a few more questions before the end. So let's look at the third root, about what is helpful at the time of death. So if we've contemplated the first two main points, that death is definitely going to happen, that the time of death is uncertain, then we should start to get a feeling like, yeah, I better think about death, not just put it aside and ignore it, because I really don't know how long this life will last, and I'm definitely going to die. And so, yeah, we'll probably feel a little bit nervous and anxious. And this question naturally arises of, well, what can help us at the time of death? What is helpful at the time of death? And so, so there's 3 points, and first is about our loved ones, like family and friends. And during our life, when we face difficulties, we usually turn to our family and friends for help, right? We're feeling upset about something, or frightened, or we have a problem, we feel we need help. Who we turn to is usually family members and friends, yeah? And usually they're there for us, ready to help us. At least some of them, maybe not all, but we have at least some people we can turn to and get help from when we need help. So we have that habit in our life of relying on family and friends to help us. So then when it comes to the end of our life, we'll probably feel the same way as we are getting close to death, especially if you have some time to prepare, like if you have an illness and trying to get treatment for your illness and start thinking that maybe I won't recover, I might die. So at that time, we'll probably rely heavily on family and friends, and most probably they will do whatever they can to help us, because they also want us to stay alive. We want to stay alive, and they want us to stay alive. So, we'll all do whatever we can to, stay alive as long as possible. So loved ones can help us. We can get a certain amount of help from them as we approach death. But then when we actually die, in Tibetan Buddhism, I think it's the only tradition of Buddhism that has this, but there's an explanation of the process of dying. We go through different stages as we die. It's not just all at once like that, but there's 8 different stages of death. And as we go through those 8 stages, our senses are shutting down, so that we no longer see and hear and so on. And so it's like our mind goes deeper within itself, and we are less connected with the outside world. So as we are dying, we can no longer see our loved ones, we can no longer hear them, and talk to them, and so on and so forth. So we're kind of moving away from them. Even if they're there, even if they're present with us, we will no longer be able to communicate with them. So this is something that just happens as we die. And so we're on our own, right? And they can't go with us. They can't accompany us through that process. So they can help us to a certain extent in the dying process, but after that, we are on our own. We are alone. And they won't be able to accompany us. And even if they try to talk to us and speak comforting words and touch us, we won't be aware of that. We won't be able to perceive that. So we're really on our own. So that's one thing, is to kind of come to grips with that and realize that we have to separate from our loved ones. And I think probably for most people that's the hardest thing about death, because we naturally feel we love them and they love us. We want to stay together. We don't want to separate. There's that strong feeling. And so we're very resistant to the idea of separating from them. It's very painful, very difficult. But this is one of the reasons why it is helpful to contemplate death, so that we start preparing ourselves for that. We start getting used to that reality that we will have to separate from our loved ones. And so a big part of that is letting go of attachment, working on our attachments. And attachment is really difficult. It's a very difficult state of mind to reduce. But if we can recognize how it's actually harmful, it's counterproductive, because it does lead to suffering. It's just normal. If you're attached to something, and then you have to separate from that thing, and you don't want to separate from that thing, the more attachment you have, the more suffering you will have when you do have to separate, right? So it's like attachment inevitably leads to suffering. But we make that suffering, yeah? That suffering is made by ourselves because of our attachment. So it's really helpful to recognize that attachment is the cause of suffering, not the cause of happiness. I mean, for a while we have happiness as long as we can be with that person or object that we're attached to, but inevitably we have to separate, and that will just create suffering. So it's helpful to recognize the disadvantages of attachment. Also, in spiritual practice, to reach higher goals, liberation, enlightenment, attachment is one of the biggest hindrances. Yeah, it's a hindrance to our development of the realizations that bring us to those states of mind. Even for concentration, even if you want to have good concentration in your meditation practice, attachment is one of the biggest hindrances. When our mind gets distracted away from our meditation objects, it's usually running away to some object of attachment. So attachment, interferes with concentration and being able to get the benefits of concentration. So it's good to really learn about, meditate on, and get familiar with the faults of attachment, the disadvantages of attachment, to recognize it doesn't bring real happiness, and it brings suffering. So that then we see, okay, I have to work on my attachment, I have to overcome my attachment. And to overcome attachment, one of the best methods is this one, thinking about impermanence and death. Just to realize, I'm going to have to separate from everyone and everything. I can't remain with those persons and beings and things forever. So getting used to that idea will help us to lessen our attachment and learn to let go, learn to let go of that attachment. So it takes time, but if we work on that, we keep meditating on those points, then that really does help. It helps, but it's still difficult because, for example, my mother, when I was trying to prepare myself for her death, I thought she'll probably die before me, and so as she was getting older, I would think about, at some point she's going to die, and I would even try to imagine, visualize that experience and prepare myself for it. And it did help when she did actually die. It was helpful that I had done those meditations, but it was still hard. It was still very difficult. I had a lot of attachment, more than I thought. I was actually kind of surprised at how difficult it was. But I'm sure it would have been more difficult if I hadn't prepared myself, if I hadn't contemplated attachment. And in addition to the difficulty of losing her, there was also a lot of love and concern. So I did a lot of prayers and practices, and I asked my teachers to pray for her. I really wanted to do whatever I could to help her in the coming life. But yeah, attachment is quite strong and not easy to be free of. So this point of contemplating that we will have to separate from our loved ones, even though we don't want to, but just to realize we can't avoid it. It's inevitable, right? And it's much better to accept that and prepare ourselves for it rather than pretend that we're going to be together forever and not do anything to prepare ourselves. Then it will be much more difficult, yeah? If you never think about that, and if you're always thinking, I want to be with this person forever and never want to separate from them, so if you go through life with that kind of idea, then you're really going to suffer, really, really suffer. So, so this point is quite helpful for us. And of course we want to go on loving them. It's not that we want to cut ourselves off from our loved ones. We want to love them and care for them. We want to preserve those feelings. But it's the attachment, the clinging attachment, that is the problem. That is the thing we want to overcome. And another thing about this first point, can loved ones help us? It's also not definite that our loved ones will be there when we die. We may be somewhere else. We may be on a plane, and they won't be able to be with us. We can maybe call them and say goodbye, but at some point that will be cut off. So it's not definite that they will be there to help us. And even if they're there, they may not be able to help us. That's another thing to think about, because our loved ones, if they haven't learned the Dharma and they haven't done anything to prepare for death, when we're dying, they might be overcome by sadness and grief and begging us, please don't die, please don't leave me, crying. And that can make it very difficult for us to have a peaceful death, right? Because we feel like I'm the cause for their suffering. I'm making them suffer, right? So some people actually don't want their relatives around when they die. They prefer to be away from relatives because they can kind of interfere with being able to die peacefully and just let go. So that's another thing to consider. I mean, the best people to have with us when we die would be our spiritual teachers and the spiritual friends. There was one nun I knew, and when she passed away, she was in a Buddhist hospice in California. And just before she passed away, I think Kirti Sencha Rinpoche had come to visit her and spent time with her, and Lama Zopa Rinpoche had come and spent time with her. So she had visits from these amazing lamas just before she passed away. And then the people taking care of her were Buddhist. So I thought, wow, that's really fortunate. She's very, very fortunate to have that experience. That's what I would like. Not people who are crying and weeping. And that's not so helpful, is it? But people who can remind you of your beliefs, your practices, and say words that will help you be in a good state of mind as you're leaving this life. That's the ideal thing. And the second point is looking at our possessions. So we all have a certain amount of possessions: money, house, property, clothes, furniture, phone, computer, and so on. And while we're alive, we rely on those things to, do our work and communicate and enjoy ourselves and so on. But at the end of our life, we have to leave all those things behind. And they can't take any of it with us, not even 1 cent, whatever's the smallest coin in currency. We can't even take one tiny bit of money, one piece of clothing, one whatever. Yeah, it all has to be left behind. And this is helpful to think about, because we usually have attachment to those things. We're attached. And attachment to our things can interfere with us having a peaceful state of mind when we die. Because we feel, oh, I don't want to leave that behind. How can I live without that? How can I live without my phone? Can you imagine going to the next life without your phone? How is that possible? Well, for me, it's my computer, I have to leave my computer behind. I have all my Dharma teachings and practices and prayers on my computer. So, so it's good to make ourselves aware. Yeah, we have to leave all these things behind so that we don't have so much attachment and dependency on them, and we're able to let go of them when it's time. And so, they can't really help us at the time of death, because we have to leave them behind, and even before we die, we may not be able to use them anymore, right? If you can't talk anymore, you can't use your hands, you can't really use your phone. So, so even before we die, they may not help us. So this can help us to realize the importance of letting go of those things, not being attached to them. And then the third point is about our body. So I think we tend to just have an attitude of complacency about our body, taking it for granted. We've had it our entire life from the moment of conception. We've had this body, we've lived in this body. We tend to identify with the body. This is me. So we very much feel a sense of identity with our body. And during our life, we can use our body for all kinds of things, for enjoyment, for work, for helping others, if we want to do that. Practicing Dharma, using our body to sit, meditate, do prostrations, and so on. But at the end of our life, our body, well, eventually we leave our body. We leave it behind. So according to Buddhism, death is the point when the body and the mind separate. The body is left behind, and the mind leaves the body, separates from the body, and then takes another life, another body. So it's the separation of the mind and the body. And if we have a lot of attachment to our body, that can make it difficult to die peacefully and let go. So it's good to contemplate that so that we start to overcome that attachment, start to get used to the idea that our body won't be with us forever. There's one idea in some Buddhist scriptures that I find really helpful, that they say our body is like a guest house. Our mind is like a traveler. It goes from life to life to life to life. And in each life we have a new body, different body. And so our mind will stay in this body for however long we live, a certain number of years, but then it leaves and goes to another life, like another body. So it's a bit like a traveler who's traveling around and staying in different hotels and guest houses, and if you're doing that, you don't get so attached to the hotel you're staying in, right? You don't regard this as my home forever, because you know you're just going to be there for a limited amount of time. So you don't bother so much about the light fixtures and the carpet and curtains. You know, you don't want to change everything to make it the way you want, because you know you're not going to be there forever. You're going to leave. So having that attitude of the body being like a guest house can help us to be not so concerned about our appearance, you know, whether we're beautiful or not beautiful, whether we're fat or not fat, or, you know, of course we want to take care of our body. We do need to care for our body, feed it, keep it healthy and fit and so on. So we want to take care of our body, but not to be overly attached to it, yeah, the way some people are, spend hours every day, you know, trying to make their body perfect, beautiful, wonderful. So maybe we don't need to spend that much time caring for our body. Okay, so after contemplating those points and how realizing that we have to leave behind our friends and our relatives, our loved ones, we have to leave behind our wealth and our possessions, we have to even leave our body behind. And what Buddhism says is the mind, it's just the mind, our mind, that goes to the next life. And together with our mind will go our karma, the karma that we create. Karmic, like karma means actions. So the actions that we do leave imprints like seeds on our mind, and those go with our mind to the next life. And they will determine the kind of experiences we have. So if we have a lot of negative karma, more negative karmic seeds, then our experiences will probably be painful ones, bad ones. If we have more good karmic seeds, then we'll have good experiences, good rebirth, good experiences in our next life. So this contemplation should help us realize the importance of looking after our karma and really trying our best to avoid bad karma, negative karma, and create good karma, virtue, as much as we can. So we have more good karmic seeds to take to the next life, and not so many bad ones, negative ones. So that's the conclusion that we try to reach after contemplating these, that it's important to practice the Dharma and to practice purely as much as we can. Create virtue and avoid non-virtue as much as we can. So we've run out of time for today. We just have 10 minutes left. But tomorrow morning I'll go through specific practices we can do to prepare ourselves for death. And that includes purification, because if we have created negative karma, bad karma, then there's the practice of purification we can do to purify that. Actually, I'm talking about that on Tuesday nights. That's another series of talks. Yeah, if you want to learn about purification. So there's a few minutes left if anyone has a question.
Venerable, thanks. Sorry. Yeah, on the point on pain, I'd like to ask some question on behalf of my male friends. So we always have argument over mind over body. When you have pain, should it be mind over body, mind-body separation, or it's not relevant?
I don't completely understand.
So if you are suffering from some point of pain, right?
Yeah.
So somebody will give you advice on the side and say, hey, Kenny, mind over body. Activate your very strong mind to counter it. Then some will say, oh, no, Kenny, no, it's mind-body separation. Yeah, you and the body are separate. The pain is the pain, you are you. Yeah. And then of course some say, hey, you're not relevant now. Just forget about it. It will pass. So some people will say things like this when we are in pain. Then it often ends up in argument. Yeah. So who is right about? Should you tolerate the pain and say, okay, like Ajahn Brahm would say, this too will pass. So you just keep saying that to yourself and then you will pass. But if it's at a critical moment of pain, right, you want to have the right frame of mind. What should people actually say to you? That means at the back of my mind, I'm trying to create a card to pass it to my wife and say this one, I'm in pain. Don't say that. Yeah. Yeah, so it's that kind of answers that we want. So it should be said, mind over body, brother. Or like my boys will say, and some say, no, mind body separation. Separate. Yeah, then or you say the Ajahn Brahm thing, it's like, these two will pass.
How about no pain, no gain?
Yeah.
Well, I don't really see that one of those is more correct than another. I mean, mind over body means that we develop a strong state of mind to be able to deal with pain and not let ourselves be overcome and freaked out, even if there's small amount of pain. So trying to strengthen the mind, develop a strong state of mind. And I mean, in Buddhism, that view is there. For example, I mean, some traditions emphasize this more than others. In some traditions of meditation, you're advised that when you're sitting in meditation, even if you have pain, don't move. Just keep sitting there and deal with the pain. And I think in the Zen tradition, you even get hit if you move. So, yeah. So some teachers or some traditions emphasize that.
Can I seek your advice? Is it a very selfish thought to up donating our organs?
Interference from the speaker. We're just trying to avoid that noise.
Okay.
So,
just to have your advice, is it a selfish thought to up our organs?
to
Donate organs
donate.
of a body.
Is it selfish to donate?
Yeah.
Huh?
Because up.
What does that
That
mean?
means not to donate.
Oh, out.
Yeah.
Oh, I see.
As
Yeah,
pain-
because I heard
pain
in Singapore,
manifests.
if you don't opt out, they will take them, right? So you actually have to say, I don't want to give my organs. In other countries, it's the opposite. They will only take your organs if you donate. Singapore is kind of unique. So is it selfish to not donate your organs? Well, I think it depends on reasons. I mean, there's a lot of discussion about this in Buddhist circles because it said that, especially in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, it said that the mind can remain in the body for a period of time, even after the breath has stopped and the brain has stopped. The mind may still be in the body for hours or even days after that. But if you donate your organs, if they take your organs, they have to cut even, I don't know exactly how it is, but like even before you stop breathing, or they'll put you on life support for a period of time. So you're not really dead when they start cutting you up and taking your organs. So some people say, oh, if that happens, if the mind is still in the body, the doctors are taking your organs, that will make the mind disturbed, and it will make it hard for it to be in a good state and go to a good rebirth. So that's one view, and that's why some people say, no, I'm not gonna donate my organs because then I might have a bad rebirth. But I mean, there's different opinions, and it's difficult to know for sure. But I heard one teacher, I don't know who it was, but this teacher said, if you decide to give your organs, and that is a really pure, sincere attitude, like you really want to give the opportunity to somebody else to have a long life, you want to give your organs, you don't need them anymore. And so if it's really a sincere, pure act of giving, because of that virtuous motivation, that you have that virtuous motivation, and even if they're cutting while the mind is still in the body, it's okay. You will still be guaranteed of a good rebirth, a fortunate rebirth. So that's another opinion, and it's difficult to know for sure. But I also can't help but wonder, because they say that during the death process, at a certain point in the death process, even before the breath stops, we no longer have physical sensations. There's no longer any bodily sensations. And so would you know, how would you even know that they are cutting your body and removing your organs? So that's what I wonder about. So the last time I had to go and renew my driver's license, and they asked me that question, I said, yeah, go ahead. You can have my organs. So now it's on my driver's license. I don't know. I didn't really think carefully about it. I just said yes. But yeah, I like that answer. I like the answer that it's a virtuous thing to do, especially when you read about the number of people who are dying because they can't get a kidney or a liver. That's really, really tragic. So if somebody can use my kidney or my liver, please take it. I don't need it anymore. So I thought about it for a long time, and I was a little scared to sign up as a donor, but I just got to the point where I did. So I don't know. I hope I didn't do the wrong thing. But yeah, so it just depends on your reason and your motivation. It may not be selfish if you really are concerned, if you really want to make sure your next life will be a good one, and you're not sure if they start cutting your body that might interfere with that. So then, it may not be a selfish motivation. But it is something to think about carefully. What does Ajahn Brahm say? Does he say something about it? Huh? No. Okay. Oh, you're the one that mentioned Ajahn Brahm. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, so you find different answers by different teachers. There's no consensus, because I'm not sure this kind of question came up at the time of the Buddha. They probably weren't doing organ transfers at that time, so it wasn't even an issue. So we'll stop there for today, and